Are you ready, kids? That's right, today we're talking about everyone's favorite sponge, who just turned 20 years old.
Future!
To put that in perspective, the only other television characters that can even touch that kind of long-term cultural resonance are Homer Simpson, Eric Hartman, and Frasier Crane? And you can see it all over the internet, in memes, GIFs, and references. What's even more mind-boggling about this to me is how this stretch is based almost solely on the excellence of the show's first 3 seasons. About 90% of the jokes, memes, and memories you have of this show are at least 15 years old, and even though the show hasn't even sniffed that kind of creative peak in more than a decade, the show has continued to flip Krabby Patties on the zeitgeist. This was never more apparent than during this year's Super Bowl halftime show, where Maroon 5 referenced an episode from 2001 to honor the late great creator Stephen Hillenberg. Now, you might be thinking that this is just because the people who use the internet grew up on SpongeBob, but we don't see this same kind of love with other cartoons from that time period, like The Fairly Odd Parents or Rugrats.
I'm a bit more complicated than that.
There's something special about SpongeBob that has ingrained it in our collective unconscious, something that's kept it going a decade and a half past its peak. So that's exactly what we're going to look at today. What makes us keep thinking about SpongeBob, making references, and why this show may never truly leave us.
He was number 1!
I'm Jackson, and this is Ideas at Play. But before we get into it, I want to take a minute to tell you about my Patreon. If you've been around the channel before, you've probably heard me talk about it a few dozen times. Patreon is one of the best ways to help me make the videos that I make, and hopefully more of them in the future. It's money directly into my pocket for this project. But I've just reorganized my Patreon in order to give more perks to the people who support me there. One of the biggest perks is that I'm pushing up director's cuts of each of my videos. Longer videos with more. Stuff that isn't necessarily to the point, but still stuff that I thought was interesting enough to write and edit about. So if you haven't checked it out before, now's a great time. The link is in the description. And now that I've gotten that self-promotion out of the way,
The dark deed you requested is done, sir.
I think the best place to start is to figure out how SpongeBob got stuck in our minds in the first place, which means looking at it through the eyes of a kid. Any cartoon aimed at children lives and dies on the genius of its physical comedy. The gold standard for this is the Looney Tunes. You can see the very clear imprint that the Looney Tunes has on SpongeBob, from things blowing up in the faces of sad sacks, to the best laid plans of a villain going awry, to its creative dismemberment of its characters. Like the Looney Tunes, SpongeBob finds creative and funny ways for its characters to move, and in ways that make sense. It's not just enough to draw a funny face. Like in this scene, where SpongeBob and Patrick finally get to see the treasure map that Mr. Krabs has been hiding from them all episode. 2 children finally let into the adult inner circle, only to see that illusion shatter.
Did you notice something familiar about this map?
You mean like that it's our game board taped to a piece of paper?
These are really funny visuals for kids, but there's an emotional arc to them, one that colors our characters without replacing them. And these gags have layers, showing us a spectrum of emotion as the scene changes.
He cut off his own hand by mistake.
You mean like this? Or like this? Or this? Or this? But what about this? Or this? Or this? Or this?
Except he wasn't a sponge.
So?
So it didn't grow back!
Check out how the movement in this scene shows us SpongeBob's commitment to the customer as he's dragged around by the wind, and his horror at Squidward's disregard, which stops him dead in his tracks.
Who cares about the customer?
I do!
Well, I don't!
Squidward.
And I'm not sure there's any better visual of poetic justice than Plankton's dejection at having triggered a coin-operated self-destruct,
Coin-operated self-destruct. Not one of my better ideas.
rushing to his own restaurant, blowing up, and then being crushed by the fist that remains.
Ouch!
We learn more about the emotions of the characters through these gags, and a lot of times, they're a bit more nuanced than feelings like excitement, fear, or sadness. And because you can read these jokes in so many different ways, they tend to still work even as you get older, even in something as silly as voice work and dialogue. Take this for example. To kids, this is a hilarious noise, but it's also funny to adults as a response to the Dutchman's call.
Howl with me so that we might set the 7 seas ablaze with fear!
His call to action and his howl set an expectation that SpongeBob and Patrick utterly dismantle in ways specific to their characters. SpongeBob tries, but is always going to be pretty unscary, and Patrick...
That'll do.
There's a kind of simple genius to slowly zooming into the eyes of Mr. Krabs, thinking he'll say something profound, and hearing this.
That smell. The kind of smelly smell. A smelly smell that smells smelly.
While it's easy to see how this kind of humor is appealing to kids,
Look at the funny face! Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
it can still work for adults as long as it's set up well.
Look at the funny face!
We never really grow out of finding them funny because we can keep finding new angles for these jokes to hit us. SpongeBob's longevity isn't just about finding new angles on what already made us laugh. Sometimes these ideas stick with us simply because they're so incredibly unique.
You okay, Patrick?
Finland!
All comedy works off the idea of subverting expectations. But SpongeBob's style is so different because it doesn't just resolve its setups in unexpected ways, but because it resolves them in ways that defy logic and reason.
Then who was flickering the lights?
Nosferatu!
This is a special brand of surreal humor that separates SpongeBob from other cartoons. Take these two examples of jokes from Patrick. The first is a more traditional setup with an unexpected resolution.
Wait, SpongeBob! We're not cavemen! We have technology!
It didn't work.
The setup, we have technology, leads us to think they'll use the computer, only for Patrick to subvert that and use it in the most primitive way imaginable. This is a classic setup and resolution, one that finds humor in the difference between what we think will happen and what does happen. But SpongeBob was one of the few cartoons that could take completely surreal tacks to this kind of setup and delivery. Here's the second Patrick joke.
You may be an open book, SpongeBob, but I'm a bit more complicated than that. The inner machinations of my mind are an enigma.
Patrick saying this at all is a punchline, set up by him calling SpongeBob an open book. Patrick is dumb, and this is a lot of really big words from him. So that's the unexpected. But the show pushes this further. The milk carton brings so many more questions because it totally defies the logic of the world. Besides the fact that it's live action and not animated, it feels completely random. Quite literally a response snatched from completely outside the show. In the words of the great television critic Matthew Zoller Seitz, given the choice between doing something unexpected yet clever and something that seems to have been released from the reincarnated id of Marcel Duchamp or Salvador Dali, it goes with option B. It all makes perfect nonsense. And you see this kind of surreal twist in all genres of jokes. It's this disconnect from reality that makes these jokes really memorable. They're not our normal punchlines. They challenge our expectations from angles we didn't even know existed, and in ways that push the boundaries of our imaginations. Even still, it's wrong to characterize these jokes as random. They don't come completely out of nowhere. They do respond to each setup, just in ways that break the reality of the world. And zooming further out, there are also some pretty high-minded ideas on the fringes of SpongeBob. Yeah, I said high-minded.
Hurry up! What do you think I'm paying you for? You don't pay me. We don't even exist. We're just a clever visual metaphor used to personify the abstract concept of thought. One more crack like that and you're out of here. No, please! I have 3 kids!
Often, these gags are discarded as quickly as they're brought up, but sometimes they serve as the backbone for entire episodes. The show has commented on everything from our obsession with celebrity, to mob mentality, to the danger of labeling the people around you as other. When you think about it, the Krusty Krab reads as a pretty solid satire of capitalism, where the greedy Mr. Krabs tries to bleed as much labor from his employees as possible, serving as a foil as equally to Squidward's clerk-esque vibe.
Look carefully at the "I really wish I weren't here right now" button.
I'm getting paid overtime for this, right, Mr. Krabs?
Sorry, can't hear you.
To SpongeBob's overzealous enthusiasm.
And at $50 an hour, too. When I started working here, I had to pay Mr. Krabs $100 an hour.
This is just good, interesting storytelling, something that always stays with you. Which all brings me back to why SpongeBob is stuck in our collective unconscious. Sure, many of us got hooked as kids and have found new reasons to love it the older we get. In that vein, a lot of people point to the adult humor that's sprinkled into the show. And although our parents probably laughed when this went over our heads as kids,
Don't touch me, I'm sterile!
I wouldn't say that it's what I find myself remembering the most. Instead, it's the changing relationships I have with the characters. When I was a kid, Squidward was just a grouch. Now, he's who I identify with the most.
Hello, you've reached the house of unrecognized talent.
Mr. Krabs was SpongeBob's greedy boss, but now he's a clever commentary on business at all levels.
So, you tried to kill me over a little new age management, eh?
But the rise of internet culture might be what makes SpongeBob the most relevant today. Absurd humor has found its home online, from YouTube videos like Llamas with Hats, to short films like Too Many Cooks, and websites like Clickhole. It's impossible to say whether SpongeBob's surreal humor inspired any of these, but it does feel right at home in the internet of 2019, which is probably why there are so many SpongeBob-related memes and reaction GIFs out there. So many snapshots from SpongeBob lend themselves perfectly to meme culture, because they give us weird and absurd visual representations of our moods and vibes.
Imagination. Soiled it! Soiled it!
Boo!
You like Krabby Patties, don't you, Squidward?
While it's really hard to make generalizations about memes because it's a word that includes so many different things, most are a kind of deconstructed language. Language is a tool to translate abstract thought into something that somebody else can then decode in their mind. I think this, say chair, and hopefully you think of something pretty similar. Of course, words can be messy, since we each have our own conceptions of chairs, but they work pretty well. Memes work on the same idea, but with way more messy baggage. While I originally wanted to make this video to separate SpongeBob from its value as nostalgia, I don't think it's possible to totally do that. SpongeBob carries a ton of nostalgic baggage for many of us, which colors everything about revisiting it, even this video. I remember constantly interrupting dinner conversations as a kid to make a SpongeBob reference. When someone brought up trying to eat healthy or work out,
No, Squidward, I meant good for your soul.
when my dad complained about the lack of real instruments in music,
Is mayonnaise an instrument?
No, Patrick, mayonnaise is not an instrument. Horseradish is not an instrument either.
or when my mom would ask if I wanted chocolate cake for dessert.
Chocolate? Chocolate! Chocolate!
The point is that snippets from SpongeBob have always worked on this level, even before there was an internet to share them. SpongeBob isn't just stuck in our heads because we saw it at a young age. It's really easy to enjoy the show's humor as an adult, from its funny voices and animation to its surreal punchlines and social commentary.
You used me for land development.
And that richness fits in perfectly online, where we can reference and build on each other with a common language. It's this weird world that has given us an even weirder lens to look through at our own world. Thanks so much for watching. Please share, like, and subscribe. And like I mentioned earlier, consider checking out my Patreon page. There's all sorts of good stuff there, and you can also get your name in the credits, like these people. I love this channel and making these videos, and I want to be able to make more and better ones. So contributing on Patreon really helps me, but I also want to make sure that it's worth it for you. So if you have any kind of perks that you think might be a good addition, let me know in the comments. I've got big things planned for the channel and all sorts of stuff coming forward, so stay tuned. And as always, thanks for watching.